In this video, I'm going to share the 10 mistakes to avoid when house hunting. And these are specific mistakes I've noticed over my 13-year career building a UK-wide home buying company, nationwide estate agency, and my own personal property portfolio. Over that period, those businesses have dealt with about £3.3 billion of property, about 13,000 transactions. So by virtue of my unique position, I notice so many mistakes that you can easily avoid. Let's get into it, but before we do, please like and subscribe because it helps me out. Number one, not looking at above your budget. Now, I'm not suggesting you stretch your budget, quite the opposite. I'm suggesting you negotiate. It might surprise you that around 2 years ago, about 80% of properties were selling at asking price or above. But right now, about 80% of properties are selling below asking price. So if your budget's £200,000, look at properties that are on at 210 or 220,000, because although an offer of £200,000 is obviously not going to be accepted every time, if you do it enough times, you just never know. Or you can check out the properties in the description below. My business is sourced between 100 to 200 properties a month to investors at discounts, saving them time. Number two, not getting a mortgage pre-approved. You don't know what you can borrow until you speak to a mortgage broker. Do that before you start house hunting because they'll be able to give you a good idea, in principle, what you can borrow. But most importantly, make sure you deal with a broker that has access to the entire market, because if they don't have access to it, then you could easily miss out on the best rates without even realizing it. If you're not sure who to use, I've got mine linked in the description below. Number three, your offer being accepted. So you view a property you love, you put in an offer and it's accepted. You are immediately overjoyed with gratitude and satisfaction. But what's wrong with this picture? The issue is that your first offer was accepted. You have no idea at this point if you could have offered less and whether or not that would have been accepted instead. You might have unwittingly paid 20 grand more than the seller was willing to sell for. It's really, really important you look to put in a first offer that isn't aiming to offend, but is testing the boundaries, testing the waters of the price the property's marketed for. Number four, rubbish solicitors. Now, I think this comment might backfire on me, but there are so many great solicitors and great estate agents out there, but there are also so many terrible ones. I'm sure you may have had your fair share of both, and if so, share your experience in the comments below. But the biggest problem I see is customers will put so much time and energy picking us as an agent, for instance, but then pick the most terrible solicitor purely because they were the cheapest. When it comes to property, whether you are using an agent or solicitor, you honestly get what you pay for in the most part. Generally, the reason a solicitor may cost less is because they'll stretch the workload. One solicitor will be dealing with way more cases, for instance. Same with estate agencies. And that is when you start to see quality of service go downhill. Whereas generally, the more realistically priced solicitors and agents are able to allocate more reasonable workloads because you're paying what's needed as a fee. Choose wisely, and if you're not sure which solicitors to use, why not get a quote for mine linked in the description below. Me and my customers have used them across thousands of transactions. They're incredibly reliable, and you can track everything with them on a quite smart online portal. Number five, skipping the survey. Skipping the survey is like buying a car without a service or MOT history. Unless you're a mechanic that's qualified to look at the car before you buy it, you just shouldn't do it. But despite this, 7 million homeowners didn't get a survey done before buying their home, which just horrifies me. Unless you're a builder or surveyor or are comfortable to assess the multitude of signs that a property may have issues, then pay to get a survey. For instance, I'm personally very comfortable about picking up the telltale signs of issues on a property, but I still always get a survey done. Number six, not meeting the neighbours. I think the number one thing people overlook is the importance of good neighbours and how depressing a home can be when you've got bad neighbours. If you've had an offer accepted, before you progress it any further, put letters through the neighbours' doors, knock on their doors, do everything possible to look to meet them and sense check if you think you'll get along or not. Also, you'll be surprised how much you can learn about the property and area by doing this. You'll be able to ask them questions about the property you're looking at buying, the area that the owner might not be as forthcoming about. If you notice any red flags, then steer clear. Number 7, be careful of leasehold properties. With leasehold properties, you don't actually own the freehold of the property outright. A leasehold is essentially a long-term lease or rental. So rather than renting a property for a year, you might buy a lease to the property for 100 years, or some are even as long as 999 years. There are 4 key potential issues with leasehold properties you need to look out for. These are potential issues, but nonetheless things you must make sure you fully investigate before buying. Number 1, escalating ground rents. As a leaseholder, you will pay the landlord ground rent for the right to occupy the land. Normally, this is a small nominal charge. However, in more recent years, the market has seen a rise in the average level of ground rents as they have become, unfortunately, investment vehicles for investors. That's why house builders, for instance, have been leaning towards building more leasehold houses, retaining the freehold for themselves. They then keep or sell on. 2, expensive service charges. A service charge is a way of ensuring that all the leaseholds in a building or development contribute to the costs of its maintenance, which obviously is a good thing. As with ground rents, you need to be sure the management of those service charges is fair and that you have an element of control of how it's spent. Otherwise, you could find they increase with no control. 3, the cost of getting consents. A lease can often restrict how you can use the property. So for instance, there may be restrictions on having pets or being able to rent the property out. Or if you want to extend a leasehold house, you might need to seek permission. And all this can incur you extra charges to request or contest any issues. And 4, a lease is a wasting asset. Unlike freehold properties, a lease is a depreciating asset. Basically, the shorter the length of the lease, the less it's worth. And when the lease starts to hit below 60 or even 70 years, you'll find you'll have to pay to extend the lease again. The good thing is reforms are on the horizon, but right now you need to fully investigate a lease and all its details before you purchase them. Number 8, check the property before you exchange and complete. The moment you exchange on a purchase, you are legally obligated to complete the purchase. And once you complete, you legally then own the property. But that's why when you exchange contracts, although you don't yet own the property, because you're legally obligated to complete, to buy it, you need to make sure at that stage you have building insurance set up from the exchange date, not the completion date. Because in theory, the house is vandalized and you exchange without realizing, you're trapped. There's nothing you can do about it. It's why it's so important you visually check the property before you exchange to be 100% sure you're happy. We had an instance where a buyer didn't do this, and through no fault of anyone, there was an unfortunate leak that had created quite a bit of damage that no one noticed because no one had visited the property. Now, in this case, the previous owner was really good about it and paid to get it all repaired. But technically, they didn't need to do that. The buyer was legally the owner of the property and its inherited problems at that stage. Number 9, compare against what's sold, not what's for sale. The amount of times I've heard my house is worth £200,000 because the house down the road is also on at £200,000. But in reality, what matters is what property is selling for, not what it's marketed for. When you're comparing house prices, make sure you study the history of what's completed, but also look to assess the properties marketed that are sold subject to contract. Although their marketing prices might not 100% reflect what they sold for, it will give you an indication of what marketing prices are leading to sales, rather than just looking at the prices of properties that haven't sold. And finally, number 10, visit at different times of day. Most importantly, make sure you view a property at different times and different days. Ideally, you want to view a property during working hours and out of common working hours. Common mistake I see is people will, for instance, view a property on a Saturday or Sunday simply because that is when they're free and not working, and completely miss the fact that during rush hour or working hours, the road might be super busy or the area might be a lot busier than they realized, or worse, there might be business open during the week that makes loads and loads loads of noise on the other side of the garden fence. If you're interested in property, I'll see you in the next video up here.